Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. When you picture Idaho, you probably immediately think of the gem state as this land of rugged individualism, right? Endless sweeping potato fields, lush, untouched mountains. For decades, the biggest headlines coming out of there were about new hiking trails or agricultural exports. It was literally the quintessential peaceful escape in the Pacific Northwest. But in the early 2020s, a really dark underbelly of violence erupted, completely shattering the state's quiet reputation with a stark, brutal reality. Today, we're looking at a state grappling with its very identity. We're going to examine how a series of incredibly violent crimes completely captured the world's attention and changed the cultural fabric of this entire region.
Okay, let's dive into this. As we look back at the past few turbulent years and stand here today in August 2026, one defining question keeps coming up. Has Idaho actually healed, or is it still under fire? I mean, from small, tight-knit college towns to the bustling capital of Boise, the entire state is caught in this massive national debate on crime and public safety. Let's map out exactly how this happened. To truly understand Idaho's recent struggle with violent crime, we absolutely have to zoom in closely on the early morning hours of November 13, 2022. The sleepy town of Moscow, home to the University of Idaho, was rocked by a massacre that would end up dominating global news cycles. Four university students, Ethan Chapin, Xana Kerneldahl, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Goncalves, were brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus rental home on King Road. The scene was so horrific, so utterly chaotic, that initial reports actually mistakenly speculated about a shooting, which tightly linked this case in the public consciousness with the broader wave of violence Idaho was seeing. Now, just take a second to consider the immediate aftermath for this community. For nearly 2 whole months, this small town of just 25,000 residents lived in absolute, paralyzing fear. The killer had seemingly vanished into thin air. Lockdowns were enforced, terrified students packed up and fled the campus. The sheer panic of knowing a perpetrator capable of such an atrocity was just walking free. It paralyzed the entire region. The question on everyone's lips was pretty simple. Who on earth could commit such a crime, and how had they just disappeared? Let's move to and see how this builds, because this paralyzing mystery soon evolved into one of the most fascinating detective stories in modern history. The breakthrough didn't happen all at once. It was a meticulous 3-step process. First off, investigators zeroed in on a white Hyundai Elantra seen near the crime scene on surveillance footage. Second, they utilized highly advanced genetic genealogy, matching a DNA profile found on a knife sheath left at the scene. Finally, they cross-referenced all of this with cell phone tower data, tracking pings that placed the suspect right near the victim's home. This incredible web of digital and genetic forensics pointed them to a suspect who was thousands of miles away. So, on December 30th, 2022, law enforcement finally moved in. They arrested a 28-year-old man named Bryan Kohberger all the way over in Pennsylvania. And what made this arrest particularly chilling was his background. Kohberger was actually a PhD student studying criminology at Washington State University, which is located just a short, quick drive right across the border from Moscow. The suspect was formally brought into the justice system, setting the stage for a massive legal battle that would captivate the nation for years. And this brilliantly illustrates the core of that legal battle. The prosecution painted a deeply chilling picture of a stalker obsessed with murder, leaning heavily on those cell phone pings and the forensic evidence. But look at the defense's counterargument. Kohberger's team aggressively countered that the microscopic evidence on the knife sheath was merely touch DNA. They argued this could have been transferred innocently long before the crime ever even took place. As we all know, the justice system often moves at a truly grueling pace. Following that rapid arrest at the end of 2022, the pretrial publicity became so incredibly intense that the trial actually had to be relocated from Latah County to Ada County down in Boise. Commencing in June 2025, the trial has now dragged into a highly complex appeals phase, right here in August 2026, with legal teams still bitterly battling over procedural errors and what evidence is actually admissible. But to fully grasp the state of Idaho today, we really have to pivot our narrative and zoom out a bit. While the horrific King Road tragedy in Moscow involved a knife, the state has simultaneously been grappling with an alarming, undeniable rise in gun-related incidents. See, Idaho is known for its highly permissive gun laws, including constitutional carry, which basically allows residents to carry concealed firearms without a permit. The clash between this deeply ingrained culture and rising public violence is fundamentally reshaping the state. Just look at this rapid escalation. In October 2021, a mass shooting at the Boise Town Square Mall left 2 dead and several injured, serving as this chilling warning that even Idaho's absolute safest cities were no longer immune to mass casualty events. Fast forward to early 2025, and the violence just kept continuing. In January, a shooting at a Nampa apartment complex sparked a massive manhunt. Just a month later, a fatal shooting occurred near Fairview Avenue in Boise. We're seeing a steady, relentless drumbeat of escalating incidents across all of the state's urban centers. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the fascinating contradiction revealed by Idaho State Police data. If you look at the top metric, overall crime in Idaho is actually much lower than the national average. But notice that second row. The rate of aggravated assaults involving firearms is steadily increasing, particularly in urban centers like the Treasure Valley, which includes Boise, Meridian, and Nampa. Unfortunately, this area has become a major hotspot for gang-related activity and drug turf wars, which is exactly what's driving that specific violent metric upward. And, this shift isn't just statistical, it is deeply emotional. One local Boise resident put it incredibly bluntly, saying, "You used to leave your doors unlocked. Now you don't even look at people wrong at the gas station. It's a different Idaho than the one I grew up in." That perfectly encapsulates how the feeling of living in a secluded paradise has been heavily fractured. The sense of inherent safety everyday citizens used to rely on, it's just profoundly different now. Naturally, this rising tide of violence shifted the spotlight directly onto the political arena. The Idaho state legislature faced immense mounting pressure from both the public and national observers to respond decisively during their 2025 legislative session. Citizens were demanding action. But the path forward was incredibly fraught in a state that prides itself so heavily on conservative values and constitutional freedoms. So what did they actually do? Well, the state stayed remarkably true to its conservative roots. Lawmakers passed bills that significantly increased funding for school security and greatly expanded mental health crisis intervention programs. However, they drew a hard, firm line on firearms access. There were absolutely no red flag laws introduced and no universal background checks passed. They focused entirely on hardening targets and treating mental health rather than restricting access to the weapons themselves. This legislative outcome perfectly reflects the clinical gridlock of the Second Amendment debate in the state. On one side, gun rights advocates firmly argue that an armed citizenry is the single best deterrent to crime, pointing to numerous instances where law-abiding Idahoans have successfully defended themselves. On the exact opposite side, gun control critics argue that the sheer ease of access to firearms is the very thing fueling this violence, allowing deadly weapons to easily fall into the hands of youth and criminals. Both sides remain firmly, deeply entrenched in their positions. Meanwhile, law enforcement is basically caught right in the middle of all this. In Boise alone, police have seized hundreds of illegal weapons in just the past year alone. Hundreds. Authorities are actively issuing warnings that the state's lenient laws are being exploited. The issue isn't the responsible gun owners, but rather criminals who are obtaining these weapons through theft and illegal straw purchases. The sheer volume of these seizures highlights the immense, dangerous challenge police face on the streets every single day. So the crucial point is this. The issue completely transcends legislation. It is deeply, deeply cultural. Because Idahoans view gun ownership as an innate right, trying to change that mindset through laws alone is virtually impossible. As one legal expert pointed out, if the culture won't bend to legislation, the real, actionable solutions have to come from the ground up. We're talking about robust community policing and dedicated, targeted youth outreach programs. As we draw this explainer toward its conclusion, it is abundantly clear that Idaho is looking at an unresolved future. The memory of those 4 students in Moscow lingers like a ghost over the university, and the bullet casings on the streets of Boise serve as a grim reminder that no place is entirely insulated from America's modern struggles. Yet, there is undeniable resilience here. The families of Ethan, Xana, Madison, and Kaylee have channeled their unimaginable grief into powerful advocacy, fighting for campus safety reforms across the state and ensuring their loved one's legacy shapes a safer tomorrow. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Will Idaho emerge from this dark chapter stronger? Or is it destined to be defined by the violence of its recent past? The Gem State is definitely no longer a secret, untouched paradise. It has become a fascinating, high-stakes battleground for the soul of the American West, locked in a relentless, unresolved conflict between the right to bear arms and the fundamental right to live in peace. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep seeking to understand the why behind the headlines.